I was occupied with the Carolina Hurricanes yesterday as they took on and beat the Edmonton Oilers 3-2 in overtime. And I know there were a lot of eyeballs focused on the opening night in the NBA as the Celtics pummeled the Knicks, and it was Family Matters LA style as LeBron James and his son Bronny shared a court with the Griffies, by the way, in attendance, which is cool. And maybe a lot of people didn't see the news, but I did. It was right before I went on the air with, I think, the aftermath, that Fernando Valenzuela passed away at age 63. And as a 15-year-old kid growing up in New Jersey, a baseball diehard fan and a Mets fan, but loving the sport. And I probably could have recited every single player on every roster in the big leagues. Fernando Valenzuela was everything in 1981. He made us, in retrospect, almost forget that there was a player strike. And he passed away yesterday. It just made me sad and happy at the same time. Sad that he passed away, but happy because I thought about watching him pitch and watching the show that was Fernando Valenzuela. Doug Glanville, younger than me, not 15 in 1981. I won't ask him how old he was in 1981 in Teaneck, New Jersey. ESPN Major League Baseball analyst at Doug Glanville on Twitter. When you saw the news yesterday, by the way, I appreciate you sending me the photo of you and Fernando.
Yeah.
When you saw the news yesterday, when you heard about it, what did it make you think about? What did it make you think about?
Man, it took me back. I mean, the thing about it is there's been a lot of discussions and swirlings and kind of rumors about his health for a little while.
Right.
I've been in LA a lot with the Mets series and calling the game, so sort of been in that circle. And at one point when the Mets were playing the Brewers, I ran into an old teammate of mine, Jose Tony Valentin, who played for the Brewers and many other teams, and he asked me about him. And we started looking into the news and heard kind of the privacy that the family wanted, but he was all of a sudden sort of gone. We hadn't seen much of him, and I guess he was in the hospital trying to recover or fight something. So I think that trying to update Tony and everybody else, that was became part of my daily routine to ask around a little bit about like, hey, anybody have any updates? So when the news finally dropped, it was tough because I've been thinking about him for the last few weeks, and this man had so much to do with my joy in baseball. Big 80s, 70s, and 80s fan, and Fernando was like the pinnacle of those 80s. Just like just what he brought to not only the diversity of the game, coming from Mexico, but also just just summing up. What we loved about that time period, pitchers going 9 innings, and he was the show. He was just a phenomenal pitcher, really incredible.
Yeah, his first 7 years in the big leagues, which again, when people think back in '81, Rookie of the Year, Cy Young, like the number one story in baseball that year was the fact that we lost 20 some odd games, 30 games to the strike in the middle of the season. We had a first half winner and a second half winner. And now in retrospect, we just think back and go, man, Fernando was great. Fernando was great, but we lost some games to this. I think the Cincinnati Reds actually had the best record in the National League, didn't make the playoffs that year because they finished second in both halves of the season. And Mets fans might think that Tom Seaver was robbed of the Cy Young, but I'm not of that ilk. But Fernando with his eyes almost rolling back into his head, or really looking up, as opposed to looking at the batter when he delivered the pitch to home plate. Those things were just fascinations for people. He went about his business in many ways differently than a lot of big leaguers.
Well, I mean, you think in the modern day, I don't know if you follow, there's a guy named the batting stance guy.
Yeah,
does all
absolutely.
The imitations. Okay, so and his name is Gar. So he does all these imitations, but there was something about, first of all, baseball and how iconic these motions and the way batters and hitters approach their game and pitchers that you knew right away. And Fernando had this signature motion. You knew right away, him looking to the sky. So one surreal thing I think about is when I was somewhere in the early 80s, probably about 82, my dad was a physician, so he'd go on these trips to medical conventions, and he would take us, and we'd go to these cool places. We went to San Francisco, LA one year. Went to San Francisco one year and went to a Dodgers Giants game where Fernando started, and he totally dominated. And I was just like, just sort of put it all together. I think we had to leave in like the 8th inning. It was like freezing, by the way, in July.
Yes.
And but the thing that was so wild for me, full circle, is I faced Fernando Valenzuela because I got called up in '96, and he was still playing. He was still pitching. And you talk about out of my mind, and just to face him, and he was, he had that screwball that you just like knew all about and watched, and of course he was much older, but he was still holding it down in there, and I think one of the moments where I was like, I've arrived, is I faced him in spring training also, and I had a really good game. I hit like a double off him, and he backed up third. And he actually nodded, kind of winked, hey, good shot, And I was like, I have nothing left to do in this game.
You have accomplished. You have achieved all. Right. Doug Glanville is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. I know statistically speaking, Fernando doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. But there's a fame element to this that for somebody like him, I think matters. I think there are players in the Hall of Fame that clearly are not among the greatest players that ever lived. Phil Rizzuto, probably. I know he's an MVP, but Phil Rizzuto, is not a Hall of Famer to me. Harold Baines wasn't a Hall of Famer. I don't think Don Sutton was ever, that great. He was consistently very good. Shouldn't the brilliance, even though it was 6, maybe 7 years of Valenzuela, shouldn't that matter more than the longevity?
Well, I mean, the thing I love about the Hall is that they'll say this quite a bit. They also are a historical, museum,
right,
alongside to enshrining. So you kind of have the best of both worlds, where if you want to recognize someone for contributions aren't necessarily statistical. And by the way, the statistics are getting so confused because we had this horrific steroid era, and did it end? Who knows? Whatever. That is one thing that just sort of skewed this sort of bottom line way to evaluate who deserves to be in. But there's no question of social consequence. You have Jackie. Dodgers did a lot, right? You have Jackie Robinson, you have Fernando, you have Hideo Nomo, right? So you have 3 cultures, that changed everything, not only just sort of for baseball, but had a larger social implication. Dodgers, deserve a lot of recognition for being in the midst of that. Now, we also have to mention with Fernando is when the Dodgers moved from New York to LA, there was a huge displacement of a lot of particularly Mexican Americans for the land to have Dodger Stadium, and it was a horrific time where they displaced an eminent domain and moved people out, and promises that weren't kept. And it became somewhat of a mission later that the Dodgers find a megastar from Mexico in some ways to make amends, but also just recognizing the potential of their fan base, which when you go to these games, you see the incredible support of Latin American community. So for those reasons, that's a Hall of Fame career. He made a tremendous mark, and then when you pitch under that kind of pressure, that's very unique. It's like you're representing so much more than the Dodger uniform across your chest. You're bringing a whole nation with you, a community who to this day are fans and remember him so fondly. Because he also was an announcer for up until his passing. Yeah.
He did Spanish radio for the Dodgers. Doug Glanville is joining us. Before we let you go, and as I was talking about the style of Fernando, I was also thinking about another pitcher who passed away recently in Louis Tiant, who turned his back to home plate. That's the guy I always used to emulate as we were playing stickball football on the side of the house was I would do the whole Louis Tion thing. But final thing, and I talked about this earlier because I think in the United States we take athletes and we put them on pedestals, but we make them celebrities and just great athletes and superstars. But to me, there's a difference, and maybe it's a subtle one, between a celebrity and a superstar and a national hero. And I think that's what Fernando was. And to a great extent, that's what Shohei Ohtani may be in Japan, or Hideki Matsuyama, the golfer who won the Masters in Japan. These people are heroes. They're looked at differently than we look at our celebrity sports superstars.
Well, there's no question, and because of that, they carry a lot more on their backs. Just try to imagine Jackie Robinson kind of breaking in
right.
and all he went through, and Fernando was absolutely that. I mean, beyond national, really international, because he opens up borders and expands the game, and you have to do it not only with just greatness, but you have to be a certain personality and figure to kind of be able to carry that with you. Whether you do it in silence to a certain degree, or you do it in a way that you're engaging on certain ways, and you have to remember learning the culture and the language. I mean, these are really huge challenges, and as you mentioned with Ohtani, there's just so much more. And I played winter ball in Puerto Rico for 2 years, and that is the United States, but
right.
still there was language at a certain degree and I remember one of my teammates who was one of the 6 mainland U.S. players that were allowed per team, and he was talking about how hard it was, and I'm just well, you're still in the United States, so just imagine what these players are dealing with, and I recommend all players play abroad and just get a sense of what it's like, a real small taste of what these players deal with in transitioning from all over the world trying to make it and then perform. And Fernando had that times 20 because he had a whole country open up and a whole community, and I mean he was just magical out there. I mean, just so incredible as a pitcher and just a figure. And by the way, he could hit too.
Yes, he could.
He could hit.
He could. We don't have pitchers don't have to hit anymore unless your name is Shohei Ohtani. Doug Glanville, ESPN Major League Baseball analyst. At Doug Glanville on Twitter, the pride of Teaneck, New Jersey. Your brother will be upset that I didn't text him that you were coming on. Thanks, man. I'll talk to you very soon.
Okay, good talking to you, man.
You got
Take
it.
care.